Guys, you're seeing Chuck Liddell's name in the news. I want to read a statement by Chuck Liddell. Chuck Liddell says, and I quote, "Last night, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department deputies who responded were professional. While the information about the case will be revealed in due courses, I believe it's important to convey and clarify a few facts about the situation. I was the victim of the incident last night at our family home, as details of the case will reveal. The deputies informed me that my wife would be arrested as I did not respond to her assault while I sustained bruising and lacerations. I volunteered to go in her place. This was one of the many times I have tried to shield my family mental health issues from the public purview. I have become painfully aware that this cannot continue, as our private life has now reached a public breaking point. Please respect our privacy as I help to navigate our family through this difficult time." Now, I'm touching on this for one reason, guys. Chuck got arrested, or headlines were made for domestic abuse. I will stay as far away from that as I possibly can because there is no end game. I was not there, not to mention it's a wildly uncomfortable situation. So if you come out and you attempt to defend somebody, I'll end up looking like a fool, and I did nothing wrong. I was sitting at home. But I would like to tell you, I'd like to tell you a few things that I know about Chuck Liddell, okay? He's a kind man. And I would put, as far as gentle, he's got to be the most gentle, badass world champion ever. He goes into the same category as Daniel Cormier, where you meet this dude that you assume is going to be this rough guy, and you've seen him do some rough things on TV, and you assume you can't joke around with him because he's not like that. He's a very calm demeanor. He's extremely pleasant to be around. And I will tell you, can't think of Chuck Liddell without thinking about MMA. And Chuck Liddell was the most recognizable MMA fighter in the world for a period of time. Think about the way I said that, recognizable. Where if somebody saw him, they go, MMA, UFC, Chuck Liddell, light heavyweight champion. The mohawk, it ended up working, right? The handlebar mustache, it ended up working. People were dressing up as Chuck Liddell for Halloween. They came to my door before in Iceman shorts, and this kid had bobby pins, and he was in a mohawk. I can't remember anybody else they ever did that for. Chuck was huge, and there has been many guys over the course of MMA who could go as far as to say they were the champion, that were anything but. In all fairness, I could name them. I wouldn't do that. There was guys that were world champion that weren't the toughest guys in my hometown. They wouldn't have been the toughest guys in my state, in the nation, let alone in the world, but they were in the right place at the right time. And as you're trying to form a sport, you're forming a division, and nobody really knows, at some point you got to put the belt out there and start some lineage. I don't bring that up to say something bad about those guys. I bring it up for the opposite reason, to tell you when Chuck Liddell was the world champion, Chuck Liddell was the best in the world. There was nobody that could beat him. And he had a shockingly effective style. What a lot of people don't know about Chuck was a Division I wrestler. Chuck was in the Pac-10. He went to a school called Cal Poly, which is on what I believe to be the most beautiful campus in America, San Luis Obispo. A wonderful campus, wonderful program, not huge into wrestling, but they were given an opportunity, and Chuck ended up on this team, and Chuck did very well. Chuck was not an All-American, but Chuck has beaten All-Americans. And that's very relevant because it wasn't his true love as the story's been told. Like, he doesn't have a tattoo on his arm that says wrestling, Cal Poly, Division I. He has on his arm that says Kempo Karate. That's what he loved. So Chuck, on accident, was preparing his whole life for a sport called mixed martial arts. And the reason, as I say, on accident, is it came along in 1993. Chuck had already started all of these things. Chuck was in college and getting done around 97, 98. I'm guessing, I'm close. UFC wasn't even a thing. Bellator wasn't a thing. Pride wasn't a thing. Strikeforce wasn't a thing. And what? Don't correct me and think you have to tell me the UFC existed. I'm aware of that, but it wasn't a thing. It wasn't somewhere where you could go and make a living. It wasn't somewhere where you could go and get attention or turn into a career. So Chuck had come through college. The first time I ever saw him, I didn't meet him, but I saw him. He was a bartender in San Luis Obispo, working hard and fast. and was living his dream on the side. I knew who he was because I was a fight guy. And Chuck had either was getting ready to or had just gotten back from Brazil, where he fought Pele Landi, Jose Pele Landi, who was a huge name in MMA at that time and believed by the media to be a pound-for-pound great and was supposed to beat Chuck. Now, Chuck had some size on him, and what they didn't know was how good Chuck was with his hands. They didn't know how good he was at kickboxing. He's advertising karate. If you looked into his career, you'd know he was a Division I wrestler, but you'd have to look into it to find it. Chuck, very similar to Justin Gaethje in that regard. I have to tell people constantly that Gaethje was a Division I All-American because he has never used his wrestling in a fight, and Chuck was the same way. But Chuck did use his anti-wrestling in fights. I can remember just by example, when I tell you Chuck was the best, he was the best. But when he's coming up, you always have that game you play, okay, he beat these three guys, but he hasn't beaten a great ground guy. Then he fights Jeremy Horn, stops Jeremy Horn. Okay, great, he's beaten a great ground guy, but he hasn't fought a great wrestler. Then you insert the monster, Kevin Randleman. Or you go look at the trilogy with Randy Couture. I mean, right over a small period of time, you start to see Chuck is fantastic. And he was one of these guys. He's never spoke about this, but I do wish somebody would ask him because I know that I'm right. Even though I've never heard Chuck say it, I know I'm right. He did not know that he was walking around with a skill set that was going to allow him to be a professional athlete. He didn't know. I imagine he got into Kempo very young. He had one of the best trainers around in John Hackelman. They met each other young. He had this wrestling skill. All of a sudden, the UFC starts to blow up. Going to work a couple of armbar and guillotine defenses in there and go out and take over the world. And tough topic, right? We're talking about some tough stuff here. Chuck asked that we give privacy and let him work through this with the assurance that all the details will come out. That seems like a reasonable request to me. And this is a guy who I know to be gentle. I've seen him with his family. I've seen him with his son. I can tell you just what a great guy he is, what a very nice guy he is. I'm going to leave it at that. Tough to start defending somebody in this. It's got to play out. It's not my business. But if you're new to Chuck Liddell, I would like to tell you this is a very, very nice guy. All he's asking for is some privacy. In exchange, says that we, the public, will get all the info at some point. That seems reasonable. And if you're old to Chuck Liddell, you've been around with him for a long time, don't forget about the nostalgia. Don't forget about what this guy did. Don't forget about how much he helped out in the sport. Don't forget that he was an advocate at one point. Chuck was doing the sport when people were still trying to ban it and saying these terrible things, and he was an advocate that was out there fighting for the opportunities that you now have or that you at least enjoy watching other people have. Somebody set that table. And of the people there, one of them's named Chuck Liddell. I would like you to remember that.